Right now, something massive is happening, and most people don't even realize it yet. The way money works in the world is quietly shifting, and at the center of it all are global conflict, rising debt, and major economic decisions being made by leaders like Donald Trump. As tensions in the Middle East continue to rise, especially around critical regions like the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices have started to surge again. And when oil prices go up, it doesn't just affect gas at the pump, it hits everything. The cost of transporting goods increases, production becomes more expensive, and suddenly your groceries, your bills, and your daily expenses all start creeping higher. But here's where it gets deeper, because this isn't just about oil or one conflict. According to billionaire investor Ray Dalio, what we're experiencing right now is part of something much bigger, a repeating pattern in history called the long-term debt cycle. Dalio has studied economies and empires over hundreds of years, and he's found that they tend to follow the same path again and again. It starts with a rising superpower, like the United States after World War II, when the dollar became the world's reserve currency around 1944 and 1945. In the early stage, debt is actually a good thing. Countries borrow money and use it productively to build infrastructure, grow businesses, create jobs, and that leads to economic expansion. People get wealthier, innovation increases, and the country becomes stronger. But then something changes. Over time, the borrowing continues, but it becomes less productive. Instead of borrowing to grow, the system starts borrowing just to sustain itself. And that's when things begin to get dangerous. You enter the late stage of the cycle, where productivity slows down, but debt keeps rising. Why? Because the system becomes dependent on it. Governments keep spending money they don't have, printing more currency, and borrowing just to keep everything running. And that's exactly where Dalio says we are today. The United States now carries over $38 trillion in national debt, and incredibly, the country is spending more on interest payments than even its massive military budget. Think about that for a second. That's not just a number, that's a signal. Dalio outlines 5 major signs that appear when an empire reaches this stage: rising government debt, internal conflict within the country, the rise of rival powers, a weakening currency, and eventually, external conflict. And if you look around, all 5 are happening right now. Political division inside the United States has grown more intense than ever. At the same time, countries like China are rising rapidly, strengthening their economies and even increasing their gold reserves as a way to challenge the dominance of the US dollar. And speaking of the dollar, its value has already started to decline. In 2025 alone, the dollar lost around 10% of its value, marking one of its weakest years in a decade. Now here's where things connect directly to policy. President Trump has openly supported the idea of a weaker dollar because, in theory, it makes American exports cheaper and more attractive to foreign buyers. That can boost U.S. businesses, but there's a trade-off. A weaker dollar means your money buys less. It means higher prices for everyday goods. And for people earning and saving in dollars, that creates pressure, especially when wages aren't rising at the same pace as inflation. At the same time, we've seen aggressive use of tariffs, particularly targeting trade relationships with countries like China. These tariffs aren't just about collecting revenue. They're a strategic move to shift global supply chains, bring manufacturing back to the United States, and slow down competing economies. But again, there's a trade-off. While tariffs can protect domestic industries, they can also increase costs for consumers and businesses in the short term. And now, layer on top of all of this the impact of war. Conflict in the Middle East has historically driven oil prices higher, and that's exactly what we're seeing again. Higher oil prices make everything more expensive, which fuels inflation further. And here's where it gets even more complicated. At the same time, there have been discussions about lowering interest rates, potentially under leadership changes at the Federal Reserve. Lower rates can stimulate the economy, but they can also make inflation worse, especially when prices are already rising because external shocks like oil. So now you have this perfect storm: rising debt, a weakening currency, geopolitical conflict, inflation pressure, and major shifts in economic policy. And if you look back in history, we've seen something similar before. In the early 1970s, the United States faced high inflation and rising oil prices. And that was also the time when the dollar was taken off the gold standard. That decision changed the global financial system forever. During that period, traditional markets struggled, but certain assets, like gold, experienced massive growth as investors looked for ways to protect their wealth. Fast forward to today, and you start to see similar patterns forming. Gold prices have already been rising, especially since the pandemic, as concerns about the dollar and inflation have grown. Energy companies are benefiting from higher oil prices. Defense spending increases during times of conflict, creating growth for military contractors. Industrial companies could benefit if manufacturing shifts back to the United States. And assets like real estate or dividend-paying stocks can provide more stable income during uncertain times. But here's the most important thing to understand. None of this is guaranteed. Markets don't move in straight lines, and no one can predict the future with certainty. The goal isn't to blindly follow trends. It's to understand what's happening and think strategically. Because history may not repeat itself exactly, but it often rhymes. And right now, the rhyme is getting louder. The global economy is shifting, the role of the dollar is being questioned, and the decisions being made today could shape the financial future for years to come. This isn't just another news cycle, it's a turning point. And the question is, are you paying attention?